Good morning from Tokyo, and good evening to everyone who is joining from the United States or anywhere else in the world. We are very pleased to be hosting this webinar today, which comes at a very critical time for the U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral relationship. Good morning from Tokyo, and good apologies. We are very pleased to be hosting this webinar today, and my name is Rintaro Nishimura, and I am one of the two co-founders of this new initiative called the U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral Next Gen Study Group. It's a group of around 35 youth leaders from the three countries and beyond who are interested in discussing issues pertaining to this trilateral relationship on a regular basis. The idea was to create this initiative from our experience as delegates at the Young Trilateral Leaders Summit, which is a government-led initiative that was started last year based on the outcomes of the Camp David Summit 2 years ago. And our group aims to supplement these government-led initiatives with the understanding that the long-term sustainability of the trilateral partnership rests on us younger generations to carry on existing efforts. And today we are extremely honored to be joined by three distinguished panelists, each with their unique perspectives on the current state of the trilateral relationship. In alphabetical order, we are joined today by Dr. Kristi Govella, Associate Professor at the University of Oxford and Japan Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Ms. Rachel Minyoung Lee, Senior Fellow of the Korea Program in 38 North at the Stimson Center and Possible Fellow at the East West Center, and Dr. Ryo Sahashi, Professor of the Institute of Advanced Studies on Asia at the University of Tokyo. And today's session will consist of brief remarks from the three panelists, followed by a moderated Q&A session, and finally a Q&A session with the audience. So if you are watching live on YouTube, please submit your questions via the live comments or email us at trilateralnextgen@gmail.com. Given that we only have 1 hour, we may not be able to get to all of your questions, but we'll do our best to fit in as many questions as we can. And before we hear from each of the panelists, I would also like to welcome Ms. Sarah Beluzov, Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy Tokyo, to give opening remarks to kick off this session. The U.S. Embassy in both Japan and Korea have been integral in making sure the YTL summit runs smoothly, and both of us co-founders had the pleasure of engaging with embassy staff as participants and also as alumni of the YTL program. And this is a great time to hear from Sarah because the YTL summit this year just concluded in Osaka. So in that sense, this is also a very good timing to hear from someone from the embassy who was, part of that. So with that, I'd like to give the floor to Sarah for her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Rintaro. I just wanted to start off by congratulating all of you for creating this new U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral Next Gen Study Group. This is exactly what we'd hoped would be the kind of outcomes that would come from you all meeting each other during the Busan Summit last year. And it's been really exciting to see your collaboration with Jin, with others over the past several months. And thank you for coming to Osaka as well to join us as a moderator for one of our panel discussions. Yes, as Rintaro said, we just wrapped up our second Young Trilateral Leaders Summit. This is part of our Young Trilateral Leaders Network of Activities, which is an official Y program under the U.S. Department of State, where we try to engage young leaders in meeting each other and supporting each other across the world. In particular, we wanted to create this opportunity for participants from the U.S., ROK, and Japan to meet and to network with each other in a forum that did not quite exist already. And many of the participants who joined us here in Osaka over the past few days said that they've been missing something like this. Many of them are still students or have started in their careers, and the day-to-day grind can be quite difficult. And so when they have a chance to step out of their comfort zone, to meet new people, to meet new networks, it's very invigorating. Many people had never met each other before, but when they started to talk, they found that they had a lot of common friends, a lot of common colleagues. But not only that, they had a chance to meet other young leaders from Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands who are also a part of this program. So they not only expanded their network within US ROK and Japan contacts, but they also met colleagues from across the Indo-Pacific. And that supports our broader goals of building networks and connections and ideas and solutions that happen not only at the government level, as Rintaro said, but also happen among people who have ideas, a shared vision, creative energy, innovative solutions. One of the unique aspects of this program over the past couple years has involved a pitch competition, and we had that yesterday at the final day of the Osaka Summit. And we heard about projects ranging from, you know, focusing on e-waste and critical minerals to creating platforms for addressing unemployment among youth. We had so many creative solutions presented by the groups, and they developed those in just a couple days after meeting each other. So we try to create these platforms to show what's possible when young leaders have a chance to connect, and then wonderful ideas like this study group develop from there. So I just again want to say congratulations to all of you. Thank you to the distinguished panelists for joining today, and please keep staying connected and supporting each other and finding creative ways to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Very kind words. I think we also learned through our experience at the summit that, a lot of youth do want to do things, but they just don't have the platform to kind of try and create those opportunities. So it's been a eye-opening experience for us to be able to kind of lead the way in a sense with this group. We've also heard other ideas similar to ours of trying to create a network within the YTL program. We did take it a step further and try to include others outside of the program, as we also know our friends and colleagues outside of this program also do want a platform to discuss the trilateral and to come up with solutions for the particular challenges that these three countries face. So it's been a great process so far, and we really hope that this is the first real step to continuing the momentum that we've seen in the last 2 years since Camp David. So with that, I'd like to turn over to the panelists and ask them to give us their assessments on the current state of the trilateral relationship. I think we can start with Kristi, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. And thank you, first of all, to the organizers for having me. It's a very exciting event and an exciting and new initiative. So I congratulate you on that. So in terms of assessing the current state of the U.S.-Korea-Japan trilateral, I'd like to make perhaps 4 points to kind of kick off the conversation. The first is that I think the major goal for the near term in this trilateral relationship is really consolidating relationships under new governments in all three countries. If we think about the Camp David summit under the leadership of Biden, Yoon, and Kishida, that was a really special moment. And it was what was needed to reset from a particularly dark time in Japan-South Korea relations. And, it launched a process that eventually involved over 80 meetings at different levels and new initiatives across a host of issue areas, and then follow-on initiatives like this new one that we're part of today. So efforts in the near future probably won't reach those heights, but they also may not need to. I mean, perhaps most the important thing right now is substantive, quiet cooperation on key issues and maintenance of the progress that was achieved. And that may not be as exciting, but it is critical. As we know, leadership has changed in all three countries since last year. And now all of the activities that were done need to be reassessed to some extent and in the context of new domestic political agendas and potentially reprioritized. And to some extent, this is natural when administrations change in democratic countries. But we know that, especially in Korea and the US, the transitions have been particularly abrupt. And so, this has left many people concerned. But a key point here is that the existing institutional trilateral tools and mechanisms can now be turned to new purposes for new administrations. So we just need to figure out what that looks like. The second point I would make is that there's still, of course, a lot of uncertainty about how things will unfold. But at this particular moment on July 9, things seem somewhat positive and relatively stable in terms of the trilateral, which is kind of impressive considering how much international turmoil there has been. Of course, there is still a lot of uncertainty and questions, but in terms of the trilateral, you often hear in the U.S. that's been internalized by the Trump administration to some extent and seen as an important tool. Ishiba and Lee have both reaffirmed the importance of trilateral cooperation, and despite a lot of anxiety on the part of a lot of observers, their initial interactions have gone relatively well. But clearly, these are early days, and particularly the foreign policies of the United States are causing a lot of uncertainty for allies and partners. So I think that's a big question mark. But at least in terms of the trilateral, there is some rhetorical and substantive support for it. In terms of potential areas, my third point where they might cooperate, I think economic security is a promising possibility potentially out of the ones that exist. And this is because these are areas where there should be complementarities between national economic interests and shared security interests. So I think it meets that criteria if the governments can work out mutually advantageous and ways to move forward. Just to highlight briefly a couple of areas, I think critical minerals are one where all three countries share interests in working trilaterally and also more broadly in minilateral initiatives like the Mineral Security Partnership, which includes 14 countries in the EU. I think we've also talked a lot about shipbuilding recently and revitalizing the U.S. shipbuilding industry. And Korea and Japan have perhaps slightly different but complementary roles to play in that, with Korea having more available capacity, I think, to build ships now, but Japan having substantial expertise in maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So things like this, I think are worth discussing, and many details to be hammered out, but promising areas. And then my fourth and final point is just that I think that we know that trilateral cooperation is going to fluctuate moving forward based on domestic political shifts, but this is something to be expected and anticipated. So, really, the goal should be to continue trying to make trilateral cooperation more robust and more politically sustainable over the long term. We know that Japan Korea relations tend to be cyclical and there are periods of tension, and then those do tend to ameliorate over time. Tensions with the US are also clearly going to ebb and flow. And, in all three countries, I think there are calls or demands to prioritize domestic interests. But, to some extent, this is, to be expected. And so really, how do we make this sustainable? And I think that bottom up people to people connections, such as this initiative, are really important. And it's really telling that it grew out of, one of the many initiatives from the Camp David Summit. So I think that kind of spirit and that kind of knock-on effect is really what we need to make this cooperation more robust in the future. So I'll end on that optimistic note.
Thank you. Rachel, do you mind going next?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation and also congratulate you on your new initiative. I would also like to apologize to my fellow panelists and the audience for the background noise. There is construction outside. So with that, I would like to make 3 points, just very briefly on my perspective on the prospects of or for U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral cooperation. And because I'm a North Korea analyst, just looking at North Korea's evolving geopolitical calculus and its potential implications for U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral cooperation. So my thoughts on the trilateral cooperation, I think I'm maybe a little bit more pessimistic than Kristi. Also, even though I would like to be a little more optimistic. And that is because there are so many unknowns, including the outstanding bilateral issues between the US and both South Korea and Japan. We've been hearing a lot about the tariffs, of course, and with South Korea specifically, the defense cost sharing. I think just the other day, President Trump mentioned $100 billion that South Korea should shoulder for USFK. And also, I think going forward, how the Trump administration engages North Korea's Kim Jong-un and what role South Korea plays in that process. And of course, how the new Lee Jae-myung administration's policy on the US, Japan, and even China may evolve in the future. I think right now, President Lee Jae-myung is saying all the right things, but going forward, that may shift depending on how the situation evolves, especially with regard to South Korea's relations with the U.S. And yes, and Japan also going forward. Next, shifting over to North Korea and its evolving geopolitical calculus. North Korea has fundamentally recalibrated its foreign policy since the collapse of the Hanoi summit. The core of this foreign policy reorientation is that it shifted away from the 30-year policy of normalizing relations with the U.S. by working toward denuclearization and realigning with China and Russia. So this is the core of the foreign policy shift. The international situation has worked to North Korea's great advantage. And by that, what I mean is intensifying U.S.-China competition, waning U.S. global leadership, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this situation, or the geopolitical realignments, have given North Korea both the diplomatic wiggle room and leverage vis-a-vis the U.S. North Korea's strong relationship with Russia and whatever opportunities that Kim Jong-un may see in this relationship in the longer term gives little to no incentive for North Korea to improve relations with Washington in the foreseeable future. The situation is much worse for South Korea, which North Korea codified into the Constitution in October 2024 as quote unquote completely hostile state. North Korea's view of China at this juncture is an interesting and a very important one. The relationship has been strained since the fall of 2023. The relationship has been seeing multiple ups and downs throughout its history, so 2 years of deteriorated relations are in and of themselves not alarming. But the geopolitical context has changed, as has North Korea's perception of its place in the world. So it is possible that North Korea may be changing its policy on China also, in which case it may have greater implications for the region, particularly in case of a cross-strait conflict. Now, what this means then for implications for U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral cooperation. I'm just going to bring up 2 points here. First, stronger North Korea-Russia ties mean a greater presence of Russia in the region, not necessarily in a physical sense, but more so in terms of their impact on Kim Jong-un's domestic and foreign policy, including his defense policy. And just looking at recent events, North Korea seems to have invoked Article 2 for policy coordination on the Israel-Iran conflict. And it's invoked Article 4 to justify troop dispatch to Russia, as we all know. And so going forward, what else can we expect? Secondly, North Korea is likely to review and adjust its foreign policy at the 9th Party Congress, which is scheduled for next year. Depending on that policy review, we may see Kim taking steps to engage the Trump administration. In the process, Kim Jong-un may seek to exploit tensions between the U.S. and both South Korea and Japan to weaken trilateral cooperation, which he has called a quote-unquote nuclear alliance and a great threat to his regime. Both of these scenarios will pose a greater challenge to and call for more coordination and not less among the U.S., ROK, and Japan. And I'll leave it at that, and looking forward to our discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Real-san, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be here. In the moment, younger generations than me to launch this initiative. So this is my great pleasure to be here. And, I have learned and studied in the United States for many years, but also I have studied in Seoul National University. So I'm personally a trilateral guy. So this is my great pleasure to be here. Okay. First of all, I have a few points. First of all, I dearly agree with my previous speakers. First of all, what Kristi said in the very beginning is very important. We, 3 countries, have new leaders from Camp David. We have now Shigeru Ishiba, South Korea Lee Jae-myung president, and also President Donald Trump in White House. So we really need to keep the momentum we have received from 2023 in the Camp David. And for that purpose, I think a high-level meeting is really important. So I really want to see a prime minister, top leaders meeting, and also defense ministers meeting should take place as soon as possible. We only had a foreign ministers meeting in February, I think, among 3 countries. But I really want to see, defense ministers meeting and the top leaders meeting within this year. So what we have to protect within this framework, I think for trilateral cooperation, most important thing is traditional security cooperation, including intelligence sharing against North Korea. And we really pleased to see the development from Camp David. But the key question is, could we keep this momentum? And under Biden administration, I think Biden administration was very maniac of multilateralism. Right? It is like John Foster Dulles was alliance maniac, in 1950s. They are really crazy for multilateralism, but we really appreciate it, because we believed multilateralism will be not only supplementing our cooperation in the alliance networks, but we could multiply, multiply our resources and our power, so force multiplier is really, really important for us in the time of, rising tensions and challenges from North Korea and also from Taiwan Strait. So, we really want to keep traditional security cooperation, but needless to say, economic security cooperation is very important among three countries and also between Japan and South Korea. So another point I have to, highlight is this trilateral is very important or has been very important, not only for trilateral purpose, but also to promote Japan-South Korea or South Korea-Japan bilateral relationship. We needed, U.S. intervention to some extent, unfortunately, to promote the bilateral relations. But it was very important for us. So we really want to see, President Donald Trump and his administration to understand the important role of the United States as they, say matchmaker of Japan and South Korea in the Northeast Asian security architecture. And now Japan, South Korea start to have new challenges from Trump administration, including tariff and also the pressure on more burden sharing for U.S. forces in Korea and Japan. And maybe some people start to say, Japan, South Korea, European countries should team up, to make a collective, say, pressure against the United States. I'm a little bit negative on that. It is a point to be discussed, maybe in data, but I'm not so much for this idea. But at least Japan, South Korea should talk more this time bilaterally about how can we keep the commitment from the United States to this region, right? And for that, what we should do, right? We really need U.S. power in this region. So, for that purpose, bilateral communication between Seoul and Tokyo is very important. And how can we, keep U.S. power in this region? And final point is actually this is maybe mostly for South Korean friends. I think now we start to see the kind of new development between Japan and United States for joint command and control. United States will have a JOC and, we'll have a more collaboration with our JJOC. And, in the coming years, maybe some people, we will see the new development on how many stars people, who should be in Japan and who should be in the South Korea, as a 4-star general, right? Some people start to say 4-star should be in Japan and 3-star in South Korea, total opposite situation. And, the reason why is, United States really need more, integration of the allies in this region, not only against North Korea, but also against Taiwan Strait. So this is, the point we have to think more seriously. But this is a good topic, for us to discuss more at this moment because, at least, it is coming, but not now. But it is a kind of the question we have to ask ourselves in coming few years. So I'm stopping here.
Thank you all for your opening remarks. I think it kind of touches on very different aspects of the trilateral, but I think common theme is there's a lot of uncertainty at this point, but there's I think a necessity in some ways for the trilateral to continue kind of progressing beyond what we've already seen in the last 2 years since Camp David. So I think it was excellent remarks from all of you. I would like to start with a question that was touched upon slightly by all of you, which is the current tensions in the trilateral, or more so in the bilateral, over the 25% tariff announcement, and also the pressure to increase defense spending or commitments to, the alliance burden sharing. I've seen a lot of kind of commentaries online nowadays that are wondering about the future of the bilateral and trilateral relations, with some pointing out that, the traditional kind of separation of economic relations and security, tensions could be in one area, but the other, like economics would be, the trade relationship would be great. But that can no longer be separated as much because a lot of the economics, especially with economic security and now security, are kind of getting put together and are no longer easy to separate. And I've also seen other commentaries about more strategic autonomy for Japan and South Korea, trying to move away, not so much completely split from the United States, but to have a little bit more of a autonomy and say in how both countries respectively are able to make their own decisions, irrespective of what the U.S. pressure looks like. So I did want to ask all of you, and perhaps we can go in the same order as the opening remarks, but how true do you think is this sentiment and the concern that we've seen of late, especially given the trade and the defense kind of pressures and tensions that we've been seeing? And how will these current disagreements kind of affect not just the current short term, but the medium to long term relationship as we think about how fast, rapidly kind of changing this immediate region in the Indo-Pacific is? Um, we could start with Kristi and go in the same order as the opening remarks.
Well, obviously, this is a very important and very complex question that we could spend hours talking about. But I guess that it's very clear that the fluctuations in U.S. foreign policy on trade and security in the form of tariffs and demands for increased burden sharing, um, they add an extra element of uncertainty to this trilateral dynamic because the U.S. was previously considered to be the more stable, actor between the other two partners, trying to bring them together, and now the U.S. is moving all over the place, and so you have, these domestic and international levels interacting and moving on all three sides as all three countries are trying to consolidate their own domestic conversations. And so, there's the potential for, misunderstanding or disagreement or tension to escalate and for that to be very hard to roll back in some cases. So I think there is a lot of hazard. On the other hand, there are structural reasons that push these countries to work together. This is not a charity relationship on the behalf of the U.S. The U.S. does get important things out of this cooperation. So I think it's about how the U.S. chooses to interpret those. And within the administration, again, I'll just say briefly that there are a lot of factions who have competing ideas about what the U.S. should be doing. And for those who are very concerned about competition with China or these kinds of things, I think that they would be more likely to prioritize different kinds of issues and discussions with Japan and South Korea. They may still want more burden sharing, but I think that they wouldn't necessarily want to hammer tariffs the same way that they have been. So I think there's a different balance, depending on how things roll out. So we don't really know what the future trajectory will be. We're only 4 months into or a few months into this new dynamic. So, but certainly a lot more potential for misunderstanding and a lot more uncertainty.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Kristi just said about how the U.S., used to be the stabilizing factor in the trilateral security cooperation, but that these days there are a lot of uncertainties. there is the question, of course, of whether the Trump administration would be interested in upholding all of the commitments that were made during the Biden administration, especially given the fact that the trilateral security cooperation is viewed as a legacy of the Biden administration. So I'm not really sure if there's a lot of interest in the Trump administration in nurturing this trilateral cooperation. My concern from a Korean Peninsula point of view is that if the tariff negotiations don't go well between the US and South Korea, and if the US continues to pressure South Korea toward paying a lot more towards defense cost sharing, how that might then change the Lee administration's policy toward the US and China also. Because depending on how these negotiations go and depending on how the South Korean public wavers, this could give the Lee administration an opportunity, or maybe it could sort of be, maybe momentum is the right word, to de-risk from the US and actually move toward China. We're not seeing that right now, but President Lee has been known to make comments about China in the past that were perceived as pro-China, that were widely reported by news outlets. So there is that potential that depending on how the relationship with the US evolves, that it could push the Lee administration towards Beijing. So that's a concern. And the second thing is, of course, going back to the defense cost sharing, and how the negotiations go, how the relationship between the US and the ROK evolves in the next few months to maybe a year, whether that could give rise to the nuclear debate again. It could, and depending on also how, the Trump administration engages North Korea, and if South Korea is marginalized in the process, all of that, I think, could give rise to the nuclear debate, which we're not hearing a lot of these days with the change in the administration. But, that's also, I think, something to keep an eye on. Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel just made a really good point. The Lee Jae-myung administration might go more to China, if their negotiation with Washington might not working well. But even without Trump factor, I think Lee Jae-myung administration want to make some rebalance between its relationship with United States and its relationship with China, because they believe the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration made too much approach to the United States. So, but I also agree with Rachel's point. The tough negotiation with Washington might create a big influence or kind of pressure on Lee Jae-myung to craft the new strategy, including more rebalancing to China. I think the same question you can make for Japan. I mean, now I think if you can read Japanese, or even you can read, with some Google translation, former National Security Advisor Shotaro Yachi just published a very famous interview yesterday. And he was very influential diplomat. And he was in charge as National Security Advisor under Shinzo Abe administration. And what he said is, Japan, in the time of this crisis, not crisis, but the tough negotiation with United States, we really have to rethink the meaning of strategic autonomy. He is very clever, so he never used the word independence, right? As you know, in Chinese character, independence and autonomy is different, right? But it has the same sound in Japanese, jiritsu. But he said, we have to think more carefully about the meaning of autonomy. At this moment, I think Shigeru Ishiba, Prime Minister of Japan, has been criticized so much. Like, you have to make more courage to talk with Trump directly. And Shinzo Abe made really well, you know. But I think after the coming election, and after a few months, I think more Japanese people will realize, oh, this is not the long of Shigeru Ishiba. This is the long of United States tough position. And that might stimulate the discussion here in Japan. And many people think more carefully, how can we make this country more autonomy from the United States? I really don't think it will go to the direction of military independence or something like that. We still don't have that imagination. But, you know, uh, they may think more carefully what kind of option we can do, we can create to be more autonomous from the U.S. influence, and kind of kind of new diplomatic breakthrough, including our biggest neighbor. I don't know, but it is very interesting to see in coming maybe months.
No, thank you. Actually, the one of my points about the more, seeking more autonomy was from Yachi-san's interview. So it's great that you also mentioned the interview. I think a good question to follow up now is actually related to China, and I think we can start with Ryo-san because this question was more geared towards you. But obviously, if the other panelists have something to add, please just chime in. But I think that is definitely a strategic alignment now between the three countries. But there's also the factor of China, especially for Japan and South Korea, in terms of economic relations that, create a very interesting dynamic between two sets of trilaterals, the U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral and also the, China-Japan ROK Trilateral, which, is also another important relationship building for Japan and South Korea, given the economic entanglements I just mentioned. And amid, current kind of concerns about alliance management and geopolitical competition between the United States and China, what might the future kind of hold for the coexistence of these two different tracks? And how do these overlapping kind of diplomatic channels, how can they be leveraged in a sense to advance the U.S. ROK Japan's mutual interests to maintain regional stability, while also trying to balance that with promoting constructive relations with China, especially given the tensions between the two superpowers. Japan and Korea will play a very kind of critical role in seeking relations with both kind of superpowers in the region. So I was wondering how that would play out in your mind. Yes.
Okay, so I can go fast. So I think, as I said, theoretically, if Japan go more autonomous, we have to approach to China. Actually, China is sending love calls to us. I mean, neighbors, more and more in after President Donald Trump arrived in White House. But the, theoretically, yes, we have to, uh, we have to accept such a love cause and make more diplomacy with China. But we have two factors to prevent from making further relationship with China. First is Japanese people may not be fully supportive to fix the relationship with China. Of course, in business sector, they really want to see the further economic cooperation, and they really want to jump into the Chinese market and again, right? So at the same time, among the people, the image of China, perception on China is still really bad. And some people say, oh, it is another, kind of hostile perception start to emerge after seeing a lot of tourism from China. I don't know, but the point is public perception is still not supportive to fix the relationship. Maybe this is also the case with South Korea. And the second factor, which might prevent us, Japan's China, from making further cooperation is U.S. pressure. Even though United States will have a new ministerial dialogue for trade in August, but at the same time, we know United States want to have more economic security partnership with non-China countries, right? Even between Japan and the United States, economic security is one of the key component. So we should understand, United States is still having a very high guard for economic security. So, and as I said, Japan is not ready to change the big architecture or structure of U.S.-Japan alliance. It is very difficult for us not to cooperate with United States in economic security. So I think what Japan can do is just to, maybe we can make some comments and advice, but we should follow the U.S. strategic direction to China. And maybe even with South Korea or even with some other countries, we may not have big leverage against U.S. strategic posture to China. So this is my take now.
Thank you. Do Kristi or Rachel have anything to add to that? In
I
the
would
interest of time, I do want to. Okay, sure, please.
I just briefly add that I think that if the premise is that getting closer to China for Japan and Korea would be good economically, there are also a lot of concerns with that, because that has been also a source of vulnerability in the past. And, if we look at negotiations or discussions over China, Japan, Korea, free trade agreements and things are very far away from, achieving substantive results on that. So there is, of course, a lot of interest in the Chinese market, but there is also a well-founded sense of the risks that involves too, I think, amongst many actors. So just to chime in on that.
Thank you. We're kind of running short on time, and I heard that we have a very good question on North Korea from one of our members, so I think we might have to shift that to the audience Q&A section. I'm sorry, Rachel. But I just wanted to tee off what Ryo-san and Kristi were talking about on economic security, and I wanted to ask. I know in your opening remarks, Kristi, you talked about how economic security is an opportunity area in, say, areas like critical minerals and shipbuilding. But I think one of the questions is, given kind of the United States, America first or unilateral approach in the context of trade and also in economic security to a certain degree. And we saw that kind of in the Nippon Steel case under first Biden and then initially with Trump, and now they have a deal. But it took a while for that to happen. And I think it was a cautionary tale for not just Japanese companies, but also for other foreign companies who are investing or have a presence in critical areas that the United States now sees in its security and also its economic security. And to kind of balance the aspect of good economic relations and also security. So to what extent do you think these examples like Nippon Steel and the United States approach affect Japan and South Korea's approach to the trilateral and what they can kind of give or pitch as ideas within the context of trilateral economic security cooperation?
So we really haven't heard much discussion of economic security in any earnest way since the beginning of the new administration. So I'll put that out there. But I would make the point that, even under the previous administration, I think there were differences in how the three countries prioritized different aspects of economic security, and there's no shared definition of economic security across the three or across any countries, really. There's a really mixed bag. So I often like to think of it as, there are three kinds of priorities. One might be resilience, so like de-risking Another might be competitiveness, which is promoting your own domestic companies, for example. And then the third we could think of as protection, or, kind of suppressing foreign competitors. And I think that, it's clear that the protection or protectionism element is much stronger in the Trump administration. But it was also, there were parts of that were there in the Biden administration too. So I guess my main point is that we don't really know right now, but I think that the realities of many of these industries and supply chains are such that it is not possible to be completely self-sufficient or to reorient them in a short amount of time. So if there is an earnest need to achieve some of these goals, then cooperation will be necessary, at least to some extent. And then I think Japan and South Korea are well placed. So whenever we do get around to an honest or, earnest substantive conversation about economic security, I think there are opportunities, but right now we're really caught up in the pretty straight kind of trade war tariff discussion. So we haven't really gotten there.
Would anyone like to add to that? Or no, I think the economic security is very kind of underdeveloped as a discussion, like you said. Especially in the context, even now with tariffs, there's always the talk about semiconductor investments and shipbuilding, but there haven't really been much details beyond just those kind of individual touch points. So it's been a kind of interesting to kind of see this develop in the trilateral and see if it actually becomes a discussion point going forward. But now I'd like to hand it over to Jin for the audience questions.
Thank you for all the speakers for very insightful discussion. I myself have learned so much. So basically, as the moderated portion of our session, came to a close, we'd like to transition to the Q&A segment. And many of our members and audience actually have submitted questions through messages and YouTube comments. And I'll be sharing a few of them on their behalf. And for those tuning in live right now in YouTube, please feel free to continue submitting your questions as we go through the initial round of questions. So first is directed to Rachel from one of our members in our study group. We've seen a notable expansion of trilateral engagement and working level meetings among the three countries vis-a-vis diverse fields since the Camp David summit regarding North Korea. As you alluded in your opening remarks, with a new Korean president taking office and President Trump, whose North Korea strategy might diverge significantly from his predecessor, now at the White House, where do you foresee continuity in trilateral coordination vis-a-vis North Korea? And in which areas do you anticipate disruption or strategic divergence between three countries?
That's a very good question. I think there still, of course, is a shared interest in, maintaining deterrence and strengthening deterrence against North Korea. I think there still is a lot of interest in, at least among the three countries, imposing UNSC sanctions, making sure that they're enforced. But as I mentioned earlier in my comments, depending on how the US president decides to proceed with North Korea, I think at least some of those factors may be disrupted, or there may not be as much interest. For example, sanctions. So as we know, the UN panel of experts for North Korea was shut down more than a year ago. And there is now a new group set up by 11 like-minded countries, right? The Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Group, known as the MSMT. So there is an effort to continue to make sure that sanctions against North Korea are enforced. But whether the US government continues to be, or whether President Trump continues to be interested in maintaining that or enforcing sanctions once he takes up the North Korea issue again in earnest and, even meets with Kim Jong-un. Would he still be interested? Depending on how negotiations go with South Korea, for example, on the USFK and burden sharing, even, the issue of South Korea's possible involvement in a Taiwan conflict and in a cross-strait conflict. There's a lot of difference, I think, between the two countries, the South Koreans and the Americans over South Korea's potential role in a Taiwan conflict. So depending on where all of that goes, I think there is potential for a lot of tension. And so, and again, as I mentioned earlier, South Korea, what role it plays, if the U.S. president goes ahead and engages North Korea and decides to exclude South Korea from that process, also, I think is another factor we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you so much for your answer. I think it really well sums up the current status quo regarding the North Korean discussion and the uncertainty flowing around the three capitals with regarding to what the future strategy would be. Would either Kristi or Ryo-san want to add anything on regarding the, okay, great. Moving on to the next question, if that's the case. It's from Ruth, also a member of our study group. It's considering the national security implications of emerging technologies and the rise of global technology competition. What are the opportunities for U.S. ROK and Japan to collaborate in technology development and diffusion? For this question, Kristi, would you like to start off with regarding the intersection of technology and security implications?
I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities in the area of both critical and emerging technologies. And I think that these have been explored in many of the existing dialogues on economic security. They've talked about things like, of course, semiconductors, AI, quantum. They've talked about space technology, which is dual use and has both, civilian and military applications. I mean, I think that given the expertise of the three countries and often complementary expertise and their interest in seeing, secure and relatively open technologies, proliferate, then there are a lot of complementarities. And so obviously, these are often bigger conversations when it comes to regulation or things like that than just trilateral. So there are also opportunities to work together in larger fora and influence regulation. But again, this is complicated by the now, re-examination of the balance of domestic interests and the desire for cooperation. And on things like AI, for example, the Trump administration has shifted its stance from the previous more kind of ethics or regulation focused approach of the Biden administration to one that is more about deregulation and innovation, as they say. So I think that, these things, as with other opportunities, are also being re-examined. I think fundamentally there are very promising opportunities that can be economically beneficial for the countries and simultaneously promote their shared security interests. So I think it is promising, but they need to be discussed and reevaluated. And, a lot of these also involve private sector actors. So it's a complex discussion, but one that should be and is happening.
Yeah, thank you so much for your insight. I think it really touches upon the very important principle of the confluence between different sectors and different industry with regarding the trilateral collaborations and it to continue its momentum. Ryo-san or Rachel, do you have anything to add on this question?
I think Kristi made a really comprehensive and a good point. So I just want to add just one point. I think for such a technology cooperation, I think Japan, US has done a lot in bilateral formats already. So the really good documents you may want to take a look if you have not read yet is a joint statement between Kishida Fumio and President Biden in 2024, which we called core partnership between two countries. We started such partnership from 2021 under Suga, Yoshihide, and Biden. And my point is the Japan-US bilateral cooperation in technology fields are really concrete, right? So you might, if we take a look, we are really, say, overwhelmed how many projects we have between two countries, right? And very detailed. It is like a university to university, national institute to national institute, and company to company. So I think, if we can do such a thing in trilateral format, that might be really good, but might be really difficult to coordinate among three actors. But maybe we have to find out some good example, right? And I think beyond technology, I think another possible area of cooperation is energy security. And also shipbuilding. But for shipbuilding, we, Japan, doesn't have big companies already. So maybe South Korean side may not want to collaborate with that. But for energy, including LNG, there's some potential, cooperation amongst three.
I would also like to add AI maybe as another area for potential cooperation. I think there has already been some discussion among the three countries on cooperation in that area. President Lee in South Korea, of course, is a big fan of AI. So there's potential there, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that really leaves a good lesson for us today to think about in which critical area the cooperation can be turned on with regarding the political climate as well. Given the limited nature of time, we have two questions remaining, but I'm going to throw it, each of you for the each panel, and one for Kristi and common question for Yeosang and Rachel together. For Kristi, it actually ties back to what you talked about, alluded to the shipbuilding cooperations in your opening remark. So Arjun from our group asked, industrial integration partnership can be a valuable third pillar to strategic relationship alongside trade and defense cooperation. With the US pushing a firm America First policy, what steps can Korea and Japan take to advance this valuable third pillar while also not leaving their economic vulnerable? So for Ryo-sang and Rachel, this is from Castor, also from our group. What impact would a potential remodeling of USFK on the Korean Peninsula towards a more maritime and air-heavy focus have for the future of trilateral defense and contingency planning? I also know that this ties back to what Ryo-san you talked about the future role of U.S. bases in Japan and Korea. So would appreciate if each of you can share your short remarks with regarding this. Starting with Kristi, maybe.
So industrial integration is important. It's something that has been discussed quite a bit in the context of secure supply chains in various industries, et cetera. And so, the important thing there is to figure out where there are complementarities that make economic sense and how to secure, a supply chain from beginning to end. And so the part that's difficult in the current context is that takes trust, and that takes a certain amount of stability in policy over a longer period of time, because it requires investments and really a great deal of confidence that there will be reliability in that integration. And so, you want it to work as seamlessly as possible. So if there is a possibility this could be disrupted by politics or by changes in the geopolitical environment, then that, of course, makes it more difficult and more risky to engage in those kinds of projects. But that was something that had been discussed a lot during the previous era of Biden, Yoon, Kishida cooperation, and it's still being discussed now. So I think it's possible, but it's being complicated, I think, by the current economic turmoil in particular.
Ryo-san or Rachel?
I can go very briefly, and Rachel-san next. Okay, so I simply, want to say, don't take my position wrong, right? I really support USFK, right? And it is very important under this security circumstances for the USFK and Korean Army and Navy work together to deter to North Korea. So it is very essential for us, even Japan, for Japan to support the position of the Korean national security perspective. So like in 1970s, when the President Carter wanted to reduce the USFK for political reason, we, Japan, really want to protect South Korean position, I think. So, we are in the same boat. So please don't take me wrong. But at the same time, I simply want to encourage, we also have to pay more attention to the security and peace of Taiwan Strait. And maybe for the United States, it could be more important, and they may start to think the kind of the new shift of attention to the southward. But it doesn't mean, we should ignore the Korean Peninsula issue. So, it is just a readjustment or rebalancing of the situation. And I totally support the South Korean security.
Thank you so much. Rachel?
So I think this is where we see some differences in what each country perceives as the biggest threat in the region, right? South Korea has traditionally viewed North Korea and still continues to view North Korea as the greatest threat, whereas with the U.S. and possibly even Japan, China is the bigger threat than North Korea. So I will just make a brief comment about the USFK. Anytime, I think this is more of a psychological thing, right, than a military operations thing. That whenever there is even the slightest wind blowing from Washington, D.C. about downsizing the USFK or changing the role of the USFK or posture of the USFK, there's a lot of public anxiety. So I think this is where communication between governments becomes very important, and coordination and making sure that the public understands that there is a lot of coordination going on behind the scenes.
Thank you so much. I think it was a good concluding remarks from all three of you regarding the substance of today's session. And now, as we approach the end of our session, I'd like to invite each of you to share like very brief concluding thoughts or final reflections in general. This time, maybe starting with Ryo-san. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for joining us, our panel today. And the last comment is what we have forgotten to talk about. That is the Trilateral Summit among Japan, China, and South Korea, which might take place this year. And it might be very interesting for us to see that, maybe three countries might talk more seriously about this trilateral under this circumstance, or maybe not. So this is very interesting moment for us to see. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Kristi?
So I would just say that, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but one thing that seems fairly certain moving forward is that in this period of U.S. foreign policy turmoil, it will be more incumbent upon Japan and South Korea to commit to trilateral cooperation if they want to see it move forward. I think that there will be a need for more action and for a commitment that is, perhaps stronger than the U.S. in some ways at some moments to make the momentum continue. And so I think that's it'll be interesting, and hopefully, leaders will be able to step up. And then just to reiterate my one of my first points, I do think that bottom-up initiatives like this one are very important in ensuring that there is a robust, multi-level, sustainable, positive trajectory for U.S., Japan, South Korea cooperation. Because at the end of the day, it's perfectly normal that there will be fluctuations. The ones we have right now are particularly interesting and dramatic, but I think that that's what really stabilizes the relationship, is when you have a solid societal base that believes that this is really something that is in their interests and there are shared interests and values. So I think that what you're doing with your initiative is really important, and I really hope it goes forward successfully.
Thank you. Rachel?
I just wanted to echo Kristi's last point about the importance of the bottom-up initiatives, such as the one that you have just started. And this was fun, and thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here, all three of you. And, as a final reflection, hearing from all three of you has only deepened our conviction to carry this initiative forward and broaden its reach in the spirit of advancing trilateral cooperation. And as Rachel and Kristi, you have alluded to about the bottom to the top approach. I think today's session at the end of the day was a powerful testament to the value of the intergenerational dialogue. We, the younger generation, our members, Rin and I, and the audience, have so much to learn from scholars and leaders like yourself who have championed this cause and this initiative. And I think we remain deeply grateful for the path you have paved, and we are truly committed to carrying this spirit forward. And lastly, to our audience, if you would like to learn more about initiative, our members' activities, or upcoming opportunities, please follow our LinkedIn page, also linked in the YouTube event description. Thank you very much for once again to everyone who joined us today, whether it's early morning in Asia or late night in the States. A sincere appreciation also goes to our advisors, partners, and our dear members who have made this event possible. We truly appreciate your time and interest, and we look forward to